Hey everyone, and welcome to the Balanced Bodies Blueprint. I am your host, Vinny Russo.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Erin Stansfield.
And we're shifting gears from all the conventional fitness narrative you hear on most fitness podcasts, as our main emphasis lies in preventative healthcare, adopting a holistic approach to nutrition, and challenging the traditional views on various fitness topics.
Our mission with this podcast is to provide you with the information you need to achieve optimal health.
And on today's podcast, we are going over the top 5 qualities of trustworthy health and fitness resources on social media. So it's going to be a little bit different of an episode. I'm going to start us off going over those qualities, going to kind of explain them a little bit. And then Dr. Erin took the liberty of actually finding accounts on social media that have these 5 qualities. So you all have a place to go besides our social media pages. So you have a place to go and actually get legitimate information. But before we dive into this, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Legion Athletics, because they provide science-backed supplements. And if you don't believe me, just go to the website and click on all the research articles that they provide for the ingredients in each product. If you want to use the code RUSSO, RUSSO, at checkout, you can get 20% off of your first order. So yeah, this is basically like a part 2 of last week's episode where we talked about the top 5 villains. And what you'll notice is that those villains do not have any of these qualities that we're going to talk about right now. So the quality number 1 is providing evidence-based information. So this is really important because the information that's being provided can directly impact a person's well-being. So we want that information to be based on relevant data. And when you ignore this, it can actually cause some harm. For example, if you say to someone who needs to use insulin that they can manifest new pancreas cells through meditation, you're probably going to hurt them in the long run. Even with our last episode, like literally like our biggest thing with everyone on that list was they really didn't provide any evidence-based information. Now look, we actually talked about this, Dr. Erin and I, we talked about how science may lag a little bit behind experience, especially in like the world of bodybuilding, because we need observation and then we need questioning to push things forward. But when you're taking something like someone's health into consideration, if this is going to be anecdotal, or if this is going to be your opinion, or if it's not proven just yet, I feel like that should be stated so the listener can make an informed decision on whether they should listen to you or not.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with this is generalizing the results of a poor quality study. So looking at animal studies, for example, you can't extrapolate that and say humans would react the same way. Now, it's a good place to start to ask further research questions, right? But you can't say you should do this because it's proven in mice. So I think that's a big thing, looking for high quality evidence for clinicians, for myself, is looking at human randomized control studies, right? And I think that that's lacking a lot in the nutrition space, unfortunately, which is to your point of some of these smaller studies are observational, sometimes are done in small groups of people because, sometimes there's specific groups like athletes. There's not a lot of study subjects that volunteer, for example, to be studied for different nutrition protocols. So research does have to start somewhere, but to generalize those results to the general population, I think is misinformation.
Quality number 2. So they do not provide one size fits all solutions. So if we're talking about health, wellness, nutrition, whatever you want to call it, you got to understand that it's so complex and so individual that rarely ever will you find a solution that will fix everyone or everything. And when you look at reputable sources, they're going to acknowledge this diversity and they're going to avoid promoting these generic solutions. One of my favorite things to help distinguish a reputable source from someone who's not is hearing the answer, it depends. Not like intermittent fasting is going to be your one and only solution. It'll be, it depends, because there's so many different variables and factors that need to be taken into account that the answer is always going to depend, because there's so much variety between those variables and those factors between every individual specific person.
I completely agree with this point. In fact, when I was getting my master's in occupational health, we had to take a lot of statistics courses. I remember that was the one thing that one of our faculty members said was, when you look at any study, um, you're you're going to have to say it depends, because studies apply to certain groups, like I talked about. It's very difficult to design a um, a very good study that controls for all confounders. And so there are shades of gray. And when anybody presents things as black and white, that should be a first red flag, right? To say, this person may not be telling me the entire picture, because nothing is really black and white.
Yeah. All right, going on to quality number 3. It's going to be credentials and basically up-to-date credentials. So, in my opinion, I don't think credentials is the end all be all, but I definitely think it has its place. And we want proper, legitimate credentials, not like a 3-month course that you take and then all of a sudden you're a certified, functional coach. Instead, we want to make sure that these credentials demonstrate that the person has undergone the right training and actually meets specific standards for what they want to essentially provide information about. When you lack education in that field where you're actually trying to give out information, it's most likely going to be either wrong or it's going to be very generic information. It's like if you have a college course and it's on business and the professor who's teaching it never ran a business, or like a person who's never trained anyone in person before trying to tell other personal trainers how to be a better personal trainer. It just really doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think this one depends, right? I think it's what information you're seeking. Like, I'm a big credential person if you're getting any kind of treatment, um, especially something that could harm you. Um, and so the person that's presenting the information needs to be able to present it in a good way and be educated about their topic. So, you know, where I look at more experience is maybe in the coaching realm, where somebody might not, there's no degree associated with that necessarily. There might be a training program or something like that. But, on the clinical side, definitely I look for credentials.
Yeah, no, well, you brought up a good point because experience can sort of be considered a credential because it is a valuable asset and indicator of experience, but I don't think it should ever be seen as a replacement for the more formal credentials. Like you could have someone who's been coaching for, 20 years, and don't have, all of the uh the nutrition degrees and nutrition certifications, but through experience they mastered their skill. But I think that's more, with experience it's more niche. It's more like whatever they really really want to focus on and they spend that many years trying to get that one focus better, then I feel like it really comes into play, but it still shouldn't replace the formal credentials. And then obviously staying up to date, right? Because we just want to make sure that the information that's being put out there is accurate and very relevant. Um, because we know that outdated information can actually contradict new findings.
Well, I was just going to say science is constantly changing.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening to anything that's science based, a lot of the best researchers and the best people in this space will admit that a lot of what they thought 5 or 10 years ago was wrong, because new data has come out. And I think that that is actually, a flag that you should look for, right? That people are like, you know what, 5 years ago, I believed this because that's what the data showed, but the data has since changed. And now, I think this, you know, you can't hold on to beliefs so much that it actually impairs your logic.
Yeah. Yeah. Number 4, and yes, I am trying to go through these pretty quickly to keep this episode under an hour because we got to go into all of Dr. Erin's social media accounts that she found. So number 4, staying in your lane, and this is pretty funny because I actually just did a post about this today. So if you haven't seen that, it's Tuesday today, so you could go after you listen to this and go look at that post. But when you offer guidance outside of your expertise, it goes against the qualities 1 and 3 that we just talked about. And when you do this and you're not the expert in that field, you have the ability to take people that actually trust you in your area and then you influence them in another area. And this kind of drives me up a wall because we see it we've had some clients already where they have personal trainers that are trying to give them advice and it's actually opposing. And I actually had to get on a couple calls where I needed to assert my expertise there because the client's being pulled in two different directions when you do that. And that's going to hurt them more than it's going to actually help them. So stay in your lane. Like if you're a personal trainer, focus on the training aspect, especially if your client has a nutrition coach. Let them worry about the nutrition. Do not like ever talk bad about each other. I mean, I never do that. Even with the trainers that did this, I said, let me hop on a call with them. Um, but another example that might be a little bit more relevant because of what's going on in the world today is when you have like professional athletes talk politics. Like they have to understand that the amount of influence that they have over people, especially the younger generations, it needs to be used responsibly. And if you're not an expert in politics, don't try to get involved and don't try to make a statement because if you make a statement, you influence those people that look up to you.
Yeah, I think collaborative cohesion is best. So in other words, if you're not in your lane, render the help of a different expert. And I think reaching across the lane will actually advance a lot of science, right? I think a lot of science is actually siloed. And so I think that the more that this becomes encouraged, the better research we're going to have, the better information we're going to have.
Yeah. And then the last quality is transparency and honesty. And honestly, you could take those two words, put them together, and get authentic. So I really think it has to do with authenticity. Um, if you have, very strong views on a particular topic, or if you have sponsorships that are providing supplements, I feel like that needs to be known and given out to the public because then it allows the listener to know that there might be some potential biases, and then they can decide whether it's worth considering or not with the information that you're providing. I also feel like the willingness to admit your limitations is something that's extremely rare, especially nowadays. No one wants to really seem wrong. And if they get called out on it, there's usually like a little bit of a war. But it is very, very refreshing. And I know you're going to talk about a few accounts that express their limitations. But what I really see that's kind of wrong here is when you don't have this transparency and you don't have this honesty and you have a big influence, what that's going to do is going to convince your audience that they might need a certain supplement or they might have to cut out a specific macronutrient to achieve the body that they desire. One really recent video that's been going around is by Barbara O'Neill, and she was a runner up for our top 5 villains. This video really talked about how she was saying the 3 biggest secrets to to Hollywood and how they make people look younger, and the actual biggest secret being a moringa tree, and that this is the biggest anti-aging tool for our body, and it's cheaper than Botox or any other anti-aging procedures. And what was so slimy about her videos that she ended her video with how she uses one called Rosabella and that you could find it right in her TikTok shop. To me, especially with how much information's been debunked with what she says, it's just a slimy way to go about things.
Yeah, I think for me, intellectual integrity is very big, and definitely there's a humility that comes along with that. We are often wrong, even in our area of expertise. I think that is one of the less talked about things in science.
Speak for yourself. No, I'm kidding.
And so I think if you can come out and be honest about that, to me, that's very respectful. That shows intellectual integrity. And I think that's something at least I value, especially in the science realm.
Yeah. Well, those were the top 5 qualities. Just to run through them really quickly one more time. Evidence-based information, so providing evidence-based information, not providing a one-size-fits-all solution, having credentials, especially credentials that are up to date, making sure you stay in your lane, and then having that authenticity or the transparency and honesty. So let's go into the accounts that you found that actually have these qualities. And when you sent me the list, I really agreed to pretty much every single one of them. Overall, it's an amazing list, and I really hope that if people aren't following these people, they do so after this episode.
Yeah, so as I said before, I think it's really difficult in the nutrition space to find good quality studies. It all starts somewhere. So a lot of people start with animal studies, and then there it goes into observational studies, hopefully in humans, and then at the highest tier for a clinician is a randomized human control study. So and that's difficult in the nutrition space because of the amount of confounders. So down to a person's genetics, their individual genetics, their biology, their physiology. And then in order to control the environment, their nutrition choices, their diet patterns, their eating patterns, and then measure any physiological response can be a huge daunting task. And so I think it is a difficult nuance that people actually probably don't even realize. And, just because you do a PubMed search and you find research or you say research says, anybody can do a PubMed search. You can get on Google, put in PubMed, and you can put in a topic. Anybody can do that. But to actually find good quality research that's evidence based and people that present it well, I think is difficult. And so, I think that a lot of the people on the list are pretty common sense as far as like if you've been in the nutrition, bodybuilding, or health space. I think a lot of people may follow some of the nutrition people at least, and then we'll get into some of the physicians and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Um,
so let's go right into the because we're on the topic, the
yeah.
fitness and nutrition space. Let's go
All
into
right,
that.
let's do that. So, the first one I'm going to talk about has been around for a while. Layne or BioLayne is his page, I think.
BioLayne's page, yeah, Layne
Yeah,
Norton.
yeah. So Layne Norton, I have followed him. I actually was a client of his very briefly when I was competing. I was actually reversing when I signed up with him. So he actually is very qualified. I've been following him for a long time and saw him kind of rise to fame. But he is qualified. We talked about qualifications. He does have a PhD. All of the information that he presents, I feel like, is pretty good evidence-based. He usually tends to present randomized controlled studies in humans, and he's very good about pointing out misinformation and pointing out when somebody, is citing a study that may be done in mice or in animals or may not be good quality. And what I like is that he actually goes through the study in a very common sense way that people can digest and will explain in very briefly how there are downfalls to the research that is presented on some of these social media accounts that account for a lot of misinformation. So I like also that he walks the walk. He's a competitor himself. He's a power lifter. So when he first started out, I think one of his downfalls was that he would make these videos combating misinformation, but it seemed very personal to him. And so he would kind of, I felt like he would get a little bit more combative than some
It felt
people.
it was
Yeah.
very negative. Like the vibe
Yeah.
to it's very negative. And if you see now, like he adds an element of humor and like he throws like obviously editing came a long way with his videos, but he makes it funny while still being able to put the point across now. And
Yeah.
it's not so personal, like you
Yeah.
said before.
I think, yeah, he's definitely refined his message. I think to me, it looks like a lot of a very mature way to look at some of these these accounts that present this misinformation. And also, yeah, he does add humor a lot. My favorite thing about his platform, which is kind of, inadvertent, but he has t-shirts that say data are greater than feelings. I love that. I
Mhm.
think because it's true, right? A lot of times we get conflicted because of how we feel personally about, especially with nutrition studies. Everyone can relate to dieting and nutrition and eating, right? Everyone has an opinion about that. And so I think there's a lot of personal feelings around that. So it's very difficult sometimes when the data doesn't show what you may feel is right.
Yeah.
And so I love that he says that. And then I like also, I talked about intellectual humility before, and he was a very public account who first came out, I think, and said, there are things that I believed 5, 10 years ago that were wrong. And he came out and said this, and he showed the data both ways, what he thought had come out, 5, 10 years ago, and how that research has changed and has changed his mind. And that is a beautiful example of how science evolves and how you should evolve with science, right? Because nothing is set in stone. We might find out, you know, 10 years later, I think you said, what if we found out artificial sweeteners actually do
Yeah.
cause a problem, and it's, we'll sit here and say, well, at the time, the data showed this.
Yeah.
And
Well, to be honest, I just want to know what you were going to do with your life if that happened. That's why I asked it.
I'd be very
Yeah.
sad.
And I didn't say in 10 years. I was like, in 5 years, what if artificial sweeteners were actually
Yeah.
bad for you? And you're like,
Yeah.
I don't know what I would do.
Yeah. My only small criticism of Layne is I know that he's very good at weeding through all the research and stuff like that, but I am unaware of his actual lab experience or running studies. And so he's very good at, saying this is the way that studies are. But as a PhD, a lot of PhDs are actually run their own labs or run their own studies. And I don't know that, and maybe he has, but I don't know that that's presented in his page or.
Yeah, I don't think he actually run. I think he even made a comment in one of his videos that he doesn't run labs. But he does critique a lot of them now.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and by labs, I mean like studies, right? So
Mhm.
like usually they happen in laboratory conditions or somewhat simulated
Yeah.
conditions.
Well, let's go on to the next one, and here's another qualified PhD, and he's
Yes.
one of my favorite. I love his little true or false stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bill Campbell. I love his stuff. He is, again, he's very qualified. He's a PhD. I love his style, his page, because I am a nerd. And every time he puts up a question, I'm like, oh, I gotta see what's the answer, And so I think that style is very much, it reminds me of college or even medical school where you have to answer questions. They're usually multiple choice. And then he goes into why, he answers the question right there. So you're educated. And then he goes into,
He shows the research
yeah,
too with the answer.
yeah. And he cites, so one of the biggest things with all of these people that I'm saying is they cite their studies. And that is my biggest pet peeve. Like when they say research or they talk about a study, if you noticed, a lot of the influencers will not cite their study. Please cite your studies. Like put in the PMID, so that other people can go educate themselves. I love that about these accounts. They always cite their studies. It was I did nuclear medicine residency at Harvard. It was one of the first things that we would get knocked on. If we did a presentation, they would say, you have to put all your references down. If you say anything that you think is factual, there better be a citation behind it because somebody's going to look at it.
Mhm.
And you better make sure that it is accurate, right? That your summary is a reflection of what they are presenting. So he does have a journal club too, Bill Campbell, that you can sign up for. I think that's awesome. And I think he does run studies.
No, he does. Yeah.
And so he does look for candidates to, enter his studies, and more research like this needs to be done in the space. So I think it's amazing that there are people out there that are educating us and also doing the research to further, nutrition and exercise science.
Yeah, speaking of his labs, what I think is pretty cool too is how like he'll say like this lab, like we're gonna run this because this was a limitation of another study,
Yeah.
and it's almost like he wants to like get rid of that limitation, and he focuses a lot on more of the athlete side, which, as you stated before, we really don't have a ton of
Yeah.
those studies.
Yeah, we need more research on athletes, is the bottom line. I think as people become more active and, they might not be professional athletes, but I feel like that should be a goal, right, of everybody for longevity reasons. And so the more research we have in that realm, I think the better. Um, Occasionally my only like small criticism again is that occasionally like he recently came out with things about Ozempic and stuff like that, and he's not necessarily a physician. So I didn't listen to it in detail, but again, we talked about staying in your own lane. So I don't know how much he, said. I believe he probably stayed in his own lane, but occasionally, some of these things bleed over. I think that's when, again, collaborative connections become very important, and presenting that information and reaching across the aisle to clinicians, it becomes very important.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next one. And I believe I showed you this guy,
You did.
and he is a qualified PhD
Yeah.
as well. It seems to be a little pattern here,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah, so you guys
nutritional
are all,
advocate. Yeah,
yes, yeah. I like him. He's snarky a little bit, and I actually like that about him. He does
he's
talk.
very articulate too.
He is, and I like his style. He is a PhD. He actually does nutrition science education. And he also has like a course or slash journal club, I believe. Again, this is a person who cites his data. Now, this person or this account may not be everybody's cup of tea. He does talk a lot about historical data, which you said, I don't know if he should be on the list, but
Yeah,
I really appreciate that historical data. Like he just posted something about like old cholesterol studies and where that came from. And I like that kind of stuff. And so I think it's, if you really want to get a good education about nutrition, I think it's a good account to look at.
yeah, no, he speaks to his audience.
Yeah.
And basically what I was saying about this list is it might his information might not really speak to our audience.
Yeah.
Number one, because of the historical studies that he goes into detail with. But also he is like to understand what he presents, there needs to be a level of, I want to say, a level of continuing education, if for lack of a better term there.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
have like some of the stuff he talks about, it's very hard to understand. And if you don't have the knowledge background, it's almost going to be like gibberish to you.
Yeah. I love it. I think it's great. So yeah, if you're looking for that.
All right, well, look, those were like the people in the fitness and nutrition space. Let's go into your doctors, which still bleed over into the nutrition and fitness space,
Yeah.
but they're more known because of them being actual
Oh
doctors.
yeah, and they're MDs. So
Yeah.
the Nadowskis, right? Dr. Nadowski. One of the brothers is a family practice board certified but specialized in obesity medicine. And then the other brother is an endocrinologist. So both very trustworthy physicians, if you will. As far as I know, they're both board certified. I like that they use humor a lot, and to educate people, and obviously they're big proponents of, because of their space in endocrinology, they're big proponents of these new weight loss drugs, mostly for diabetics, because that's who they are treating. They also treat people with obesity. So if you see their accounts, you might get the impression that they're peddling these drugs. I should emphasize that if these physicians were associated with big pharma, they would be a hell of a lot richer.
Yeah.
And I think that they truly are looking out for their patients, and these drugs are good options, especially for the patient population that they are seeing, and for the long-term health effects, as far as like preventing heart disease, helping with weight loss, helping, with just overall quality of life too. And so, if you look at their accounts, you may think that they're peddling something, but I really do believe that these doctors do mean very well and do educate the public on these obesity meds. Um, so, and my favorite things about them is they do follow society guidelines. Like they're not the type that are giving out Ozempic for vanity reasons. Okay. They are actually following the guidelines, the medical guidelines out there, the endocrine society. They also walk the walk, like both of them work out. They're
Mhm.
both very active. They lift weights, which I love. Sometimes they'll show their meals, or sometimes they'll, be working out in the gym. And I think as physicians, not every doctor walks the walk, right? Some
Well,
physicians
yeah. If
are
you look,
giving advice, but they don't look the part. And I love that they do look the part. And so I think it's a great example
yeah,
to patients, especially.
if you look at Carl's he's shredded like year
Yeah,
round.
yeah,
So it's funny because like Spencer is the funny one who's always putting out those memes, and
yeah,
then you got Carl who's just fucking shredded year
yeah,
round.
yeah,
And yeah, it's cool because they have a podcast together, and they go over all this information. It's the
yeah,
Docs Who Live podcast. If you're
yeah,
not listening to that, I think you should,
yeah.
especially if you're interested in those GLP ones, because that's like the main focus of their most recent episodes.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes they dive deep into the research and you may or may not understand that, but I think it's a very good perspective. For physicians, it's great because they look at all the studies, they kind of give us the overview and talk about the limitations and stuff like that. So I love their podcast. Definitely check them out.
Yeah. Your next one, I show you those
You
tonight?
you did.
I'm
You
showing you
did.
all these
Yeah.
people. Look at that.
You did not show me the Nadowskis.
Yeah,
I think I told you about them.
no, you told me about their podcast. I knew who they were, but I
Yeah.
never listened. No, I did listen to their podcast
Yeah.
because remember, yeah, I don't know. You definitely were more into them than I was, and then you got me like
Yeah.
really into them.
Yeah.
The next account is Dr. Ids. So he just recently blew up. He's got a good book out called The Saturated Facts.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good book too. Read it already. So yeah, why don't you go into why he's on the list?
All right. So again, he's a medical doctor. He's European. He has a master's in nutritional
Wait,
research.
because he's European, he's on the list. What do you got for is that?
I mean, I like his accent.
it?
um, he's also, so they have different board certifications in Europe. He does, I guess, in Europe, they have lifestyle medication or sorry, lifestyle medicine board there. I believe that's probably similar to our preventative board here. Not totally certain about that, but that's kind of what I thought when I saw that. His account's cool because again, he's combating misinformation. He does cite studies. He'll put the background will be his study and you'll have the PMID on there. I love that. He's not offensive, which I think is he's not very abrasive. He just states the facts like, hey, this person was wrong. And even if somebody attacks him, he doesn't get overly emotional about it. And I love that. I think that he just is very even keel. It's definitely as a physician, that's kind of what you want to be.
Mhm.
You don't want to get overly emotional if somebody does, come at you. So I love that about him just personality wise. Um, there are some nuances between, practicing medicine in Europe versus the United States. I feel like European countries tend to promote prevention more. And he does talk about the different nuances, which I think is interesting as well to kind of give us an overview here on the American side, how Europe might be different.
Yeah.
And he even talks about like some of the nutrition stuff in Europe, why it's different than here in the US. So I think that's all um, great information.
Yeah, it's cool because it's like people send him 100 messages like with the videos of like who he should like debunk. And all right, with who he should debunk. And it's funny because like I'll do a video and it's like he either did it like before me or like he wanted to put one afterwards. And I know he's not following my account or anything, but it's cool because we're on like the same page
Yeah.
with like trying to debunk information. He's just very, very good at it.
Yeah. I like he's very concise too.
Yes,
He
yeah.
can give you the information very
It's
quickly.
usually within like a minute and
Yeah.
30
It's
seconds.
like
Yeah.
perfect. Um, the next one I'm going to talk about is one of my favorites. I listen to a podcast. It's the Unbiased Science podcast. Dr. Jess Steer. I don't know if I'm saying her name correct. Um, she's a public health researcher. She was affiliated with a physician not too long ago, and I think that physician left for different reasons. I liked when she had that physician on because clinically speaking, it was nice because she's a public health researcher, so she's more in the lab, and then you have somebody who's actually treating patients. So as a clinician myself, I really appreciated that. So that was a little bit of a loss for me. but again, she combats misinformation. I think, as a clinician in the preventative medicine and being boarded in that, she does present that information very well. And she's definitely against pseudoscience, which, if you're educated in this field, is a big thing. There's a lot of pseudoscience out there that's sold for very cheaply, and she really does a good job of combating that. She does highlight preventative health recommendations, which I think we should all pay attention to. I think that it is one of the things that is neglected in our US medical system. And so it's starting to be a little bit more recognized by insurance, but it's still, I think we could do definitely a better job. And so I think accounts like this where they highlight that sort of research or that information is important. And we already said she has a podcast. I love that she stays in her lane. She always brings on experts to talk about the fields where she is interested in, and she collaborates with them, but she usually does an interview style. So I love that because then you get their expertise. So she definitely stays in her lane.
Yeah, and their page has amazing infographics. They're really cool. They're very, very concise in terms of information put on there. But it's usually based off of, their recent podcast episode, and they just put all the information. If you don't want to go listen to their podcast information, you have infographics on their social media, mainly the Instagram, that explain it in a nutshell. It's almost like a quick summary.
Yeah. And I think with her account, you have to, take Layne's advice. Data is greater than feelings,
Yeah.
because sometimes, she's talking about different things, and it's the data out there that shows that. So, don't get offended if she's like, you should get vaccinated.
Yeah, yeah. That's another topic for another podcast. But let's go into the last two who aren't as well known as the ones that you initially said. Even unbiased science, I think it's now like they're coming up.
Yeah, they're coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the next two, yeah, I don't think they're that well known. But I did look into the next one you're going to talk about, and her information is very, very good. And then the last one, obviously, I knew about. But yeah, why don't you go into Danielle?
So Danielle Bellardo, MD is her account. She is a board certified cardiologist. She focuses on prevention. That's what I love about her account. So one, she's qualified. This is a person who has done residency, has spent many, many years educating herself and treating patients, right? So very important to remember. I love the fact that she's focused on preventing heart disease, and she does educate the public about cardiology. She definitely cites her references. I think her information is meant to be digested by the general public. And so definitely very user friendly. You don't have to be an MD to look at her site. She has high quality information regarding lipids and testing. And her account's kind of nice. It's not always medical.
Yeah.
She does have some personal stuff on there. So I feel like, some of the doctors that didn't make it, like Gabrielle Lyon, I feel like her message is the same
Mhm.
all the time. And so she cites research too, but it's the same thing over and over. And I feel like once you've heard that message a few times, you're like, all right, I got
You
it.
got it. Yeah, no, I think having the variety posts it's cool because it like humanizes these people,
Yeah.
right? So having that, and then yeah, her information. If you go on to her social media page, her Instagram page, you'll see like as you read it, like thinking like cardiologist, you're thinking, oh man, like am I gonna understand this? It's not like the nutritional advocate. She breaks it down. She makes it pretty simple to understand. So I would definitely go check her out. And let's head on to the last one of the day.
All right, this one I feel like the bodybuilding people will know. Victoria Felker. So again, she is a PhD in women's health, and she looks at steroids a lot, steroid hormones. And I think that's kind of her claim to fame, as she's a steroid researcher. I think she's Canadian. She's not based in the US. So I've listened to her stuff. I've actually got on her website. She does post YouTube videos of the podcasts that she's been a guest on. They are very interesting. A lot of it focuses on female physiology, and she talks about in detail different issues, especially in female athletes, which I think is useful. The hard part about her is that she looks at everything very detailed. Like if you she talked in one podcast on how she analyzes information. And so I think the difficult part for that is she definitely is a PhD, right? She's a researcher. So translating that into a clinical setting is a little bit difficult. But her account's interesting because she does know a lot about steroids and hormones, especially in females. So definitely worth looking at her page and seeing if you like the information.
So I kind of came across her account early on in my coaching career. A lot of it had to do with trying to really understand females in general and their ebbs and flows with hormones and stuff like that. So as I, had more and more clients come on, and different, the more clients you have on, the more variety you deal with. So having that and having more female clients, having an education that she was providing on her YouTube channel and things like that, it just really, really helped me understand what females were going through and the ebbs and flows of their hormones and stuff like that. So I got to give some credit to Victoria for doing that. Yeah. So just going over the people that were named for social media accounts that you could go follow. Layne Norton as BioLayne, Bill Campbell, you'll find, just type that in. The Nutritional Advocate, the Nadowskis, so Dr. Spencer Nadowski and Dr. Carl Nadowski, Dr. Ids, Unbiased Science, Danielle Bellardo, and Victoria Felkar. So hopefully you all enjoyed this episode. It was a part 2 going off of the villains. These are like the heroes. So just to give everybody a little heads up, next week we do have a guest coming on. She is a psychologist, and we will be talking about the psychology behind eating disorders and a little bit of addiction thrown in there. So we got a good episode coming up for you guys next week. See you all then. So on behalf of Balanced Bodies, we just want to say thank you for joining us on this episode of the Balanced Bodies Blueprint.
We are committed to bringing valuable content. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we'd greatly appreciate it if you can take a moment and like it and leave a 5-star review.
On Apple, just go to the show, scroll down to the bottom and rate it there. If you're on Spotify, go to the show's page, click the 3 dots, and you can rate it there as well.
And if you believe in the power of knowledge, share this episode on your social media to try and get the information out there to as many people as possible.
And as you navigate your own path towards better health, remember that Balanced Bodies is forever in your corner. See you all next week.
The podcast content may include discussions of medical topics and health-related information. However, the information provided should not be considered exhaustive or complete, and it should not be relied upon as a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment.